Welcome to the world, baby Eric. Our friends and sponsors Ricky and Kelly of Groenfell Meadery have a new addition to their family, and they're celebrating by giving a gift to you. Until May 7th, you can get 15% off cases and 10% off everything else, including the Ancient Collection and Starry Olsa Mead on Groenfell.com. Groenfell and Havoc make deliciously drinkable honey beverages that are inspired by both ancient and modern flavors, and from now until May 7th, you can get them delivered to you across most of the country at a 15% discount on cases and 10% off everything else. At family-owned and operated, Groenfell.com. That's Groennfell. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 29th, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Adam Ross of Twin Span Brewing shares a couple of examples of his take on Pre-Prohibition Brewing. What was beer like before the wasteland of prohibition in the United States? Stay tuned to find out. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, and if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewers' logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Steve and I are set to get together this very evening to catch up on shooting video episodes. April has been a rough one for lots of reasons, but I hope we can make it up to you by shooting 3 shows this evening based on delicious beers. I've got behind-the-scenes videos in the can for subscribers, and I'll be posting recipes as usual. And if you're a financial subscriber, you'll get to see all that before everyone else. I hope to be pre-releasing those by Friday, and I appreciate your patience. Let's take a quick look into the mailbag. Colin writes in with this. Colin says, "Thanks for doing the water profile sampler. I'd been looking forward to it and was glad differences were noticed. Since I've started adjusting water, I've noticed a significant improvement in my brews. I use RO water so I don't have overwhelming minerally tastes," in reference to our minerally tastes last time. Colin says, "With your helpful influence, I just tried priming a batch with Brewer's Best conditioning tablets and noticed significant settling of the sugar at the bottom of the bottle. Do you shake the bottles at all or invert them? My whole point of tablets was to bottle straight from the fermenter and reduce oxygen pickup, but shaking seems to counter that. But maybe the sealed bottle doesn't actually have significant oxygen." Colin says, "The conditioning tablets were pretty slick for what I was trying to do. I used tart cherry juice concentrate in a syringe to prime half a batch of Belgian quad. And then was able to bottle the rest of the batch with the tablets, and I varied the carbonation level on a few bottles for fun. I'm so excited for a tart cherry quad. The sample was killer," Colin says. That does sound like a delicious experiment with the quad. Please let us know how that turns out, Colin. I don't think inverting the bottles a couple of times would hurt things, even though in my experience with using the sugar drops and the tablets, they seem to dissolve and disperse on their own just fine. So I think the yeast also, the yeast should eat the sugar just fine, and I think it should take care of the oxygen in the bottle as it ferments the priming sugar. At least that's my understanding. And good to know you've improved your beers significantly, Colin, by playing with your water profile. And I'm looking forward to round 2 of our water profile sampler, which is ready to bottle right now. And I did use RO water this time. Meanwhile, I got an email from Gilad in Israel, who did his own water treatment experiment. In a triangle test that he shared with others, he didn't find significant differences between water profiles that he used. I looked at the recipe, and Gilad's recipe was a lot more hoppy than mine, so I don't know if that was a factor in sort of masking the flavors, or I don't know what was going on. So, as with most things in this hobby, your mileage may vary. One thing that doesn't vary is our affection for our friends and sponsors at Imperial Organic Yeast. One of the beers we're planning to sample this evening is my Mexican-inspired lager, which is getting pretty low in the keg because it's so darn delicious. It was brewed with L09 Que Bueno from Imperial, which is their current seasonal yeast. It's a lager yeast available through the end of May. And this beer started at around 10:51 and finished at around 10:10 in only like 3 or 4 days at 58 degrees Fahrenheit or 14 C on my basement. I say 3 or 4 days because on the third day the yeast had started to flock out. It was like done. So I moved it upstairs and roused it back up for a diacetyl rest, which I'm not 100% sure was necessary because the airlock was smelling pretty good, pretty clean. The resulting beer is clean and crisp with a little bit of sweetness from some flaked maize that I put in the grain bill. So, and I've got another packet of that Que Bueno that I want to try on another recipe before it warms up too much around here. You know we love Imperial Organic Yeast. My stir plate is dusty because I don't use it anymore to make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches. With a pitch rate of 200 billion cells, my airlocks are usually bubbling before bedtime. Ask your local homebrew store for L09 Que Bueno and all of the other amazing Imperial strains, and check them out at imperialyeast.com. It's imperialyeast.com. Okay, let's talk to Adam Ross about his take on pre-prohibition beers. Adam Ross, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Always happy to be here, James.
According to Skype, we chatted like 7 months ago. Doesn't seem like 7 months ago. Seems like a long time.
Yeah, it's been quite a year, so it's not too surprising.
You were generous enough to send me... Oh, first of all, let's remind people you are at Twin Span Brewing. And where are you all at?
We're in Bettendorf, Iowa. It's part of the Quad Cities. It's right along the Mississippi River. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, so I experience reference points. We're about 2.5 hours west of Chicago, right on the Mississippi.
And you've helped launch this brewery right as the pandemic was also launching.
Yeah, we're fun like that, and we are going to have our 1-year anniversary actually here in just a couple of weeks. May 9th is the official anniversary, but we're going to celebrate on the 16th. We don't want to. May 9th happens to be Mother's Day, and we don't want to take away from the mamas out there. So we're going to do a special brunch and ultra barrel aged huge beer release to coincide with that. So yeah, it's been a fun year, a lot of fun. It sounds like you don't believe me.
Yeah, I can't tell if you're being sarcastic or not.
Yeah, it's had its challenges for sure. I mean, opening during the pandemic, we don't know what normal looks like yet. But on the flip side, we haven't had to lay anyone off. We haven't had to really pull back the reins on anything. It's just been slowly opening and quietly, trying things out and expanding and growing. So I look on the bright side, and if anything good at all could come out of the pandemic and starting a business during it, it's that it allowed us to start off slowly and to grow from there.
Yeah, you got to ramp up instead of ramping down during this thing.
Exactly, yeah.
And you're in the position where you get to exercise your creativity. And we talked to you about some, one-off beers that you've tried in the past, and you get to are you still doing like a weekly basis, releasing some new fun thing?
Yeah, more or less. I committed to that early on, and we've had a few weeks where nothing new came out, but then we'll have a week where a few things come out. And I was just looking at the records, and we've released 54 beers, and it hasn't been 52 weeks yet. So I've exceeded that goal, and I've gotten a name for myself. I've had a few people come in and say, like, one thing we know about your brewery is that you have variety and you have styles we've never heard of, and there's always something new every week. Even our flagships, a couple of our flagships, I tell everyone it's more of a series. It's more of like a concept. It's not going to be the same beer when you come in every time. There's going to be differences. And as long as we're transparent about it, it seems people don't mind, and they actually kind of like that. And I host a monthly Facebook Live Beers with the Brewer thing, and I just hang out either in my home office or at the brewery, and I encourage people to join and ask questions. And I talk about what we're working on, and yeah, we're getting a pretty good open fan base, and I think they appreciate the changes and the transparency.
What are people attracted to? What are the trends?
Well, there's everyone. Hazy is always in our top 3 sales. So I was telling you before we hit record, I look at the sales numbers just about every day. I have this program that does ounces per day. And yeah, there's trends. The hazy is always in the top 3, whatever hazy I have on right now. As it's warmed up, I have a light lager that's really people like that. And then there's a fruited sour beer. Whenever I release a fruited sour, it's our top seller for a while. So yeah, something light, something fruity, and something hazy. Those are more or less, you can guarantee, in the top 3, at least for our community and our customer base.
So are you putting fruit, unfermented fruit and purees and such in the serving vessel?
Not quite. So I'm adding it post-ferment to the unitank, and then we're packaging from there. So some puree, and we use puree. Some puree does get left behind. We're certainly not a brewery where if you fill a crowler, we have to tell you have to keep it cold or it'll explode on you. I'm very much against that. And I thought this latest batch, I did a 10-barrel batch, and did like 150 pounds of puree. And I thought that was just insane. And then I sat down and did the math, and that's like half a pound per gallon, which for, homebrewers, that's not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like a whole lot going up a ladder and pouring all that puree into the little port at the top of the fermenter.
But you
and
let
it felt a lot on the wallet too. Yeah, puree's not cheap.
But you let it ferment out. You don't package unfermented sugars.
Well, we're not really packaging, but no, I mean it's I add it when it's cold, when the yeast is crashed out, and then I add it. So yeah, if we got into the business of adding selling cans to grocery stores and stuff, I'd have to take some precautions there. Mm-hmm. But there's a small enough amount that if people do go home with crowlers, we're not concerned about the explosions.
The reason I'm asking, and this is off topic, already we're off topic, but that's it's still talking about beer, which is the main topic. But the reason I'm asking is that Oregon Fruit sent me some cans of 3-pound cans of puree, and I'm toying with the idea of putting it in the keg, especially pineapple juice. I'm thinking about doing like a big juicy, like no boil extract, essentially just a giant hop sampler beer, and then pitching that with unfermented pineapple juice in the keg. And I'm just wondering what the repercussions, is that an advisable thing to do? Or
yeah, I'd keep it cold.
Yeah.
I think you'd be fine. These cans that are exploding, there's breweries that have become infamous for this. They're adding way more than what this Oregon Fruit can, I'm sure, is, or what I'm adding. I mean, these beers that are exploding are more puree than beer at that point. Like, you want to brush your teeth after drinking one of them. So a little bit of pineapple juice, and as long as you don't get the keg hot, I think that's a great idea. And that's my preferred method, even back as exclusively homebrewing, was to add the fruit post ferment. As a homebrewer, was pretty well known recipe of mine was I cloned New Glarus's Belgian Red.
Oh.
And even talked to Dan Carey about it, and he's like, yeah, you got it. I added potassium sorbate to the keg, because in that case I added so much fruit that I did have a little bit of concern about re-fermentation. But yeah, just a little bit of that sorbate and that arrests fermentation.
Yeah, when I interviewed him for the show years ago, he was a little cagey about the details But he did say something like, take a lesson from wine making, which...
Yes, I remember that episode, and that's where what sent me down that path. He does not use potassium sorbate. I won't reveal his secret, but he was not cagey with me. He straight up just said, "This is how we do it." I was like, "Oh, surprised that he just told me the answer."
Yeah, so if you ask him, maybe not on a podcast, maybe he'll tell you.
Yeah, just maybe if you're one-on-one and maybe he's had a beer. Or I don't know.
It was at a beer festival, so that could have been part of it.
He's feeling generous.
I'm gonna get letters from New Glarus now. They're not that far from here, so better watch what I say.
Well, we don't want to get you in trouble. Well, you were generous and sent me a 6-pack of beers. And so this will be the first time that I will have the opportunity to actually try your wares. So you've been talking about, your brewing practices and such, and, I assume you're a good brewer, but, here we're about to find out.
Money where my mouth is, right? I actually bottled them full. So our normal packaging format is crowlers, 32-ounce crowlers, and I don't want to ship you 6 crowlers. Maybe you'd be okay with that. But I took a homebrew approach up at the brewery, and I filled off the faucets, and then I sat on them for a few weeks thinking, like, there's no way this is going to turn out good. And then I actually did a side-by-side with a fresh pour of one of the beers with one of these bottles, and I was pleasantly surprised with my ability to package off a faucet.
Huh. Yeah, I people have, the counter pressure bottle fillers and all this stuff, and the beer guns, and what I've been doing for Steve, on keg only beers that I have is I take a PET bottle, and I release the pressure in the keg, and then just put enough pressure in there to just push the beer into the, just using a Cobra tap, and as long as I, don't agitate it a lot, as long as I don't release a lot of the carbonation, it seems to package pretty well, on that fairly low-tech method.
Right. It does help to purge with CO2. I will say that. We have done side-by-side packaging crowlers when we we're first starting off at the brewery, and we don't have a dissolved oxygen meter or anything like that. We just have taste buds. But a couple days, even if you don't purge a can or bottle with CO2 before you fill it, there's a noticeable oxidation of the beer.
Ah, good point. The topic of the day, since I didn't want to do all 6 of these at once, one reason is because, we're talking at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, and just for self-preservation, I didn't want to tackle all these, but also I'm greedy, and I want to get as much content as in as many shows as I can. So there were a couple of these that are listed as pre-prohibition beers, and I can't remember if we've done a show on the concept of pre-prohibition beers. If I have, it's been so long that it's time to talk about it again. But every now and then you see, something listed as a pre-prohibition beer. So how do you, as a brewer and as you're formulating recipes, how do you approach that? I mean, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, there's the elevator pitch I give people when they ask about that is it uses corn, it uses 6-row, and it's bigger in every way than what post-prohibition. But if you go a little deeper, there's the BJCP definition, and then there's the and this is going to sound like a slam against BJCP, but then there's the real pre-prohibition. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, there's, BJCP isn't the only authority. They give the to brew one of these styles today, and that's what the 2 that I make are BJCP compliant, I guess is the way to put it.
So what is the difference? I mean, how do they define it, and what is the quote unquote real When you say real, does it mean historic?
Yeah, a little more reflective of the historic. I mean, and this is a historic style. BJCP listed under historic styles. Um, but pre-prohibition is anything before prohibition, which casts a pretty wide net
Mm-hmm.
on what time period we're talking about. Um, I mean, I don't have the style guidelines in front of me. I probably should. I might be contradicting them or something, but yeah, they encourage the use of, like I said, 6 row and of corn, and then they have the IBU guidelines and ABV guidelines and everything, and they are higher than post-prohibition lagers, like the big pilsners that everyone's familiar with and drink in college and whatnot, but historically, it tells a little different story from what you see in the guidelines.
So what happened? I mean, during those, 13 years of prohibition, what happened to beers? Why did the recipes change before and after?
Yeah, there's this. So there's 2 books I've been going off. I'm certainly no beer historian. I like to dabble in history quite a bit, and I've been reading up quite a bit on these styles. There's 2 books out there in particular that I done a lot of research from, and one of them is the American Handbook of Brewing, Malting, and Auxiliary Trades, published in 1901, and then there's 100 Years of Brewing, and those 1901, also published 1901. That is before Prohibition, so I haven't seen a whole lot of written history from a brewer's perspective of what happened during Prohibition, but the big thing that happened is that for 13 years, people weren't drinking that much beer because they weren't supposed to. And when they were drinking, a lot of people were drinking spirits and, just trying to get the most bang for their buck when they shouldn't be drinking at all. But 13 years is a generation's worth of people not drinking beer. So, and being used to these cocktails and spirits. So when beer is allowed again, everyone's taste buds had shifted and changed in the U.S. So it comes back in a lot lighter and a lot more approachable. And then you get into the 50s where manufacturing is homogenizing, and they're very much talking about purity of drinks and beers, and purity a lot of times means flavorless. And so it takes this huge hit and becomes much more like the beers we're used to drinking today from the big brewers.
Yeah, that goes along with what Maureen Ogle said in her book. Originally called Ambitious Brew, but I'm not sure I can't remember what it's called now. But search for Maureen Ogle both in the archives and on your favorite book purchasing site or a bookstore if you have one of those. But it's an excellent read, and yeah, she talks about cocktails and the changing taste of Americans, and going into the 50s and such, and white bread, Wonder Bread, and just the blanding of the taste buds, is just something that happened, and beer was one of those things that was apparently affected.
Yeah, great book. Just reread a good chunk of it here recently. So I mean, I think a lot of us know that story of how these beers were bigger and probably stronger before Prohibition hit, and that's the way the BJCP looks at it. But actually digging into the brewing records and these 2 books I just mentioned that were published before then, as well as there was trade journals that you can read online from the late 1800s, brewers' trade journals, and they tell a pretty different story. There was already this move towards blandification of beer, I guess. They're older doesn't always mean better. We have this, idealized. A lot of us have this idealized version of these beers being so great before the big bad prohibition, and that isn't necessarily the case. It's they were already heading in that direction and going after more homogeneous brewing, and it was actually considered a temperance beverage for the large part of the back half of the 19th century, and that beer didn't get you drunk. And Prohibition was starting to kick into gear in the mid-late 1800s. Here in Davenport, they actually adopted it well before Prohibition. They had a local prohibition on alcohol, and the beers were brewers were starting to catch wind of that this prohibition thing is probably gonna happen. So let's really position beer as being something you don't drink to intoxication. So they started dropping gravities and reducing the amount of alcohol that were in these styles well before Prohibition kicked in. So as part of my research as well, I've been reading old newspapers from mid-late 19th century around here. Ultimate goal for me has been what kicked this all recent sub hobby of mine is trying to find a local recipe. So I have my pre-prohibition styles at the brewery, but I know I crafted those wholly out of what I read in the guidelines. And I wanted to see, can I brew one that actually that they would have brewed? And there's so many articles from that era where here in town we've had a very strong German population in history, but there were people here before the German migration, and the Germans really get painted as scapegoats of all these problems in society at the time, and the Germans loved their beer, so the beer became vilified as well. And there's articles that today absolutely would not get published. They are very politically incorrect, and they paint a very negative picture of these quote foreigners who've been living there for decades and who are very valuable members of society. One of these German brewers, downtown Davenport, was already quite large by the Civil War, and even after that, they didn't have plumbing down there. So we have this big hill that runs through the middle of downtown. People would just send their waste out into the street in the gutters, and there are people writing about how dirty and smelly everything was. And this brewer is like, I don't want that anymore. And this went to the city to put in plumbing, and they're like, nah, we're good. So he paid for it out of his pocket. So this brewer ended up putting in the sewer system and making the city not smelly. And they're still talking about this, quote, the problem of the Dutchmen and the Germans, and vilifying beer in the same breath.
Yeah, it's odd for immigrants to be scapegoated
right.
at any time in history, but before I step in something, I'm going to open. Which beer should I open first? We have a pre-prohibition lager and a pre-prohibition porter.
I'd start with the lager. It's lighter and it's less alcohol, but still significant. That one I call that one Liffey. So the reason for Liffey is, as a homebrewer, this recipe started as a clone to Harp. Similar in the same vein as Harp, which is was originally Irish, and I wanted to basically, and I modified it throughout the months and years, and brewed it a handful of times as we were planning on the brewery, with the goal of it being one of our opening beers, and it was. But it uses English and Irish malt as well as corn and 6-row and those more American ingredients. So it's kind of an imaginary scenario of if there was this English or Irish brewer in America making ingredients somehow with his home stuff. I did try an entire and what would have been more historically accurate would have been entirely six row and corn. I will tell you there's a reason that's left in the it's not it is not not all that great for modern palates, at least.
Huh. The 6-row?
Yeah, to have that much six row. So it's like 50-50. The base malt in both these is like a 50-50 blend of six row and Maris Otter, actually.
So what does the 6-row bring to the beer that's unpleasant in your mind?
It's a very grainy, earthy, rough flavor. And even back looking at these books that were published at the turn of the 20th century and reports from the late 19th century, people weren't even loving the flavor back then. Corn and rice were added to beers to help convert the starch and six row, but also to help kind of ease off that flavor of that intense malty earthy flavor of six row. So a little bit goes a long ways, but I get away with a 50-50 blend. I'm a little averse to going any more than that. I've done it. It just wasn't the best.
This is good. And these have been sitting out. We talked for like 30 minutes before before I hit the record button. So they're nice and warmed up. And it's really nice. It's a kind of a, what would you call it? A light copper color?
Yes. Yep.
And where does that come from?
A lot of that's the Maris, but then there is a little touch of Cara Red, I think. I'd like to say there's a really smart reason for that, but no, it was when we first opened, I couldn't get the grain I really wanted. And then I used this one to sub it in, and I was like, oh, that's more different than I thought. And then people really liked it and responded to it. So I'm like, oh, I guess I'm stuck with that one.
It's good. It's like you said, it's grainy. There's a nice, I'd say it's well balanced, although I say that a lot. Well balanced malt character. You know, there's not a ton of hops, at least to my palate. At this time of morning, but and there's is there a kind of a fruity yeast character? It's kind of on the sort of fruity side. You know, it's not as crisp and clean as like a modern day industrial lager as far as being dry and flavorless. To be
there
generous.
is, and you can call it laziness, or you can call it me attempting to recreate history, but it's a lager yeast fermented, a little warm. I don't. Depending on the brewery and the time period, you certainly wouldn't have gone down to quite as cold a temperatures as they get today, and not quite as clean. They're still advocating for the use of thermometers in a brewery in some places in the late 19th century. So, I mean, it's my attempt at being a little different, both in the color and in fermentation. I didn't want anyone to confuse this with, a macro light lager if it's sitting on the bar or if it's handed to them. I want it to look different and smell a little different, taste a little different.
Yeah, it reminds me more. I think you said harps, right, at the beginning.
Yeah.
It does remind me more of an English-ish beer than say just like a German lager. And that's not dissing it. It's good, and I would drink more than a pint of this for sure.
Yeah, there's and in the recent research I found I might be a little closer to history than I thought. It's impossible to brew with the ingredients they used 130 years ago, of course. It's hard to find any hops that were actually used in brewing back then, let alone grain. I mean, Maris Otter, I think, was cultivated in like the late 1950s. But I did find some records in Iowa, and I found that one of the breweries here in town claimed they were brewing a beer of 100% Iowa-grown malt, and then another record saying that Iowa was pretty well known at that time for their barley. Barley was kind of advancing from east to west, from south to north, and at that time period, the late 19th century, the Iowa barley was known as a variety known as Scotch. I don't know if that was why it was called that, if it was reference to Scotch whiskey or if it had Scottish origins, but it was darker and plumper grain. So the color and the character might have been pretty close to what that beer is right now, to Liffey.
And you haven't talked about the hopping yet, have you?
No. So it is I probably should get this in front of me. It's Magnum for bittering, and this batch I went with just a slight touch of Centennial at the finish. The first batch, I'm going to go back to it actually, was Liberty, because Liberty's just different enough from the Hallertau hops that I don't think anyone would claim it was a German beer, but it's kind of its own thing. Then Centennial's a little brighter and citrusy and a little more fun.
Yeah, it's nice. The as I sip on it, there's a lingering, and I guess it's the Maris Otter, a lingering kind of almost a roasting, almost a caramel or caramel kind of sweetness at the very end of the sip. That makes it really interesting and kind of adds probably to the the complexity of the malt bill, or the perception of the malt bill.
Yeah, I do know that one finishes relatively dry. It's at 008. So, and on that note, I actually did not send you another beer that I actually have 3 pre-prohibition technically. I have a Liffey Light, and on a whim, I took a barrel's worth of Liffey, and I did some math on it, and I realized that if I add water enough to get it down to a finishing gravity of 0, the ABV goes down to 4.2. And there's a famous brewery out of St. Louis you may have heard of that takes, they brew one big lager at 5.4% alcohol, and they add enough water that it gets down to 4.2 for their light version. And I kind of half released it as a joke. I even had it spelled Lite for a minute. and people actually really loved it. And I'm like, well, okay, we're going to spell it Light because I don't think we're allowed to use that spelling of it. And people love it. And now they love it more than the one you have in front of you. So you might have one of the last, if it comes down to an issue of tap space or what beers are in the portfolio, Liffey Light might win out. But that sweetness you get, that you're getting right now, is gone then, and it takes the edge off some of that bitterness.
Let's take a quick break to talk about some good news from our friends and sponsors, Desiree and Dave of High Gravity in Tulsa. They're offering 20% off homebrew ingredients. That's right, during the month of April, you've just got a few days left. On HighGravityBrew.com, you can get 20% off all homebrew ingredients just for being a Basic Brewing radio listener. You know HighGravityBrew.com is the place to go to take the pain out of propane with awesome electric brewing systems. But they've also got an incredible inventory of ingredients to make your next beer amazing. Just use the promo code BBApril2021. That's BBApril 2021 at HighGravityBrew.com, and you can save 20% off your homebrew ingredient order for the rest of this month, and there's just a couple of days left. Use the fun and easy Build Your Own Beer feature on HighGravityBrew.com and enter the promo code BBApril2021 and save 20% off your ingredients during the month of April at family-owned and operated HighGravityBrew.com. That's HighGravityBrew.com. I'm pouring the second one, which is the Davenporter, the Pre-Prohibition Porter. Oh, I just got it. I didn't get the pun until I said it.
And
after I named this one, I did see there's some breweries out there in the world that have their own beer called Davenporter, but I'm like, it's this one's brewed by someone who lives in Davenport. This one's brewed by a Davenporter, so I maybe I get some authenticity points for that.
Oh,
Yeah, that one's that one's a fun beer. It's
I'm getting
I'm really
I'm getting like first of all, the head is more persistent than the first one, but I'm getting I want to say cinnamony
mhm.
character off of the flavor. It's delicious.
Thank you. Yeah, pre-prohibition porter. Whereas we can all kind of guess at what a pre-prohibition lager is going to be, because if you use the shorthand of saying it's like your modern day lagers only with corn and some greenier grain and stronger. Prohibition, the porter, on the other hand, though, totally different history. I find it really fascinating. Porter was brewed in the U.S. for centuries. Um, we're an English colony, and so we loved our porter, and we were importing it for the longest period of time until we had some falling out, back in the late 18th century, and then all of a sudden it's highly discouraged for people to be importing this English product. So we started taking a crack at it ourselves, and
There's a little bit of smoke in this too.
right, yeah, it's so the style is that we didn't have these English maltsters, and we didn't have all that much malt even to begin with in the U.S. So um, the color is largely derived from molasses, and
Huh.
that beer is. I did a 15 barrel batch, and I added over 100 pounds of molasses, which is a lot of molasses.
Wow.
Percentage wise, it's significant. I don't believe it's over 20% of the fermentable, but it's up there. Might be close to that.
But the body is substantial. I mean, it apparently didn't, the the fermentableness of the molasses didn't knock the mouthfeel.
Yeah, it's I contribute that largely to the 6 row, and the 6 row will add a little bit of body. I've discovered, or I've perceived at least. Plus the English malt that got cut in with that. There is a little bit of chocolate malt and pale chocolate, which is a little historically incorrect for this style. But if you just add the molasses, it doesn't quite get to that level of darkness I wanted. And there's actually recipes on this one. So whereas the pre-prohibition lagers, I've yet to find a recipe beyond 6 row plus maybe up to a third of corn. But I did find a recipe from early 19th century where it's basically 2/3 was pale malt, probably 6 row, and then a third was corn grits, which I've got a good chunk of corn in that porter as well. And then they would release that as a plain beer. They'd call that their Pilsner, or they'd call that, once Pilsners became famous, or they'd call it their pale beer before it became famous. And they would release a beer called a Münchener, which is kind of a dunkel, where they'd add to that beer a little bit of malt extract for color and a little extra sweetness post-ferment. And then for the porters, they would take that base beer that they are also selling as, Pilsner or Pale Ale, and then they're adding in porterine, which porterine, far as I can tell, it's either molasses or it is a malt-derived sugar syrup that they would have roasted until it got very dark and burnt and maybe a little smoky. So, the molasses I added some pretty dark, smoky molasses. I think I'd have to check my notes. I think there might be a little blackstrap mixed in with, I forget what it's called. The mid-range molasses.
It's really good. there's a lot going on. There's, like I say, there's at that very first sip I took, it was just like, what is that? Is that cinnamony? And then the smokiness kind of came through, or the perception of smokiness. And there's a sweetness without it being cloyingly sweet. And there's enough carbonation, to scrub that off as well. And the bitterness level balances things out too. So it's not, I don't want to give the perception that this is a molassesy, sweet, syrupy beverage, because it's not. It's fairly clean and dry, but there is a substantial enough mouthfeel to, that it's not watery at all. It's really interesting, really fun. I'm going to have to save some of this for Susan because she's going to like this one.
Yeah, it's so the bitterness is, I want to say I stuck to the BJCP guidelines on that, which offhand I don't have in front of me, but the fermentation was done with an English ale yeast fermented below what the yeast manufacturer stated. A lot of these, part of the history of pre-prohibition porter is that the English had essentially moved out of these brew houses and the Germans were moving in. And so the Germans brought in their lagers and their pilsners, and they had these English brew houses in America, and people still wanted porter. So a lot of pre-prohibition porters are lagered or fermented as a lager. I went with the cool ale ferment that then spent 4 or 6 weeks at near freezing temperatures before I packaged and sold it off. And that really drops off those rougher edges and makes it a little cleaner and more sessionable. Yeah,
it doesn't have the fruity esters that the lager has, ironically. but I swear there's an oakiness in there too. I mean, if you had told me that this had been aged on, like a clean, like medium toast oak barrel, with a little bit of smoked malt in there, I think that I would believe you, because there's I don't know, maybe it's just my palate, but I do get it. There's a tiny bit of like oakiness. And it's not an astringent oakiness, but there's a little bit of vanilla, and like I say, the kind of spicy, the cinnamony kind of character in there as well, and then that little bit of smokiness. And this, and this isn't like a spiced beer. I don't want to give the impression at all that it is like a novelty beer. I'm just saying that, in comparison to just a regular run-of-the-mill porter, that there's something a little extra in this one that, brings more complexity to it. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, and I it's all that molasses. I mean, there's no oak involved. There's nothing too wacky of a fermentation. Nothing added in the fermenter other than the yeast when I pitched it. A lot of that is that molasses, because the grain bill is pretty simple. Like I said, split 6-row and pale ale, and you might be getting some of that oakiness and earthiness from the 6-row. I get those characters of it. And then there's corn, and then there's pale chocolate and regular chocolate, and that's it.
Wow.
Hopping on that one. So the first time I brewed this beer as a home brewer, I thought of the clever name of Davenporter when I was brewing it. And when I went to add the second hop, so there's bittering hop. Again, I use Magnum for everything. And then I wasn't sure if I was going to use Kent Goldings or I was going to use Fuggle or something American. And I opened the pack of Fuggle, and it has this really tobacco-y aroma to me. And Davenport, historically, we used to be one of the biggest cigar manufacturing cities for a period back in the 19th century. I just thought that would be fun to have something that has a note of tobacco to it. So that lends into that, I think, earthy, woody character that you're getting out of the beer.
Yeah, I could be easily talked into tobacco. I could easily switch over from the oak barrel to tobacco. Like I don't smoke, but I've dabbled in the past, and maybe like a spicy cigar. Maybe another descriptor that you'd put in there. Just the sharpness, of the smoke, and then that kind of toastiness of the tobacco. I could totally go with that.
I don't want to talk you into tobacco, James. We have enough vices in this hobby. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's I have dabbled as well, and I just got that. Yeah, like you said, spicy. I don't know. I keep using the word earthy. I don't know. It just makes me think of dirt getting in a garden, and maybe you had a cigar hanging out of your mouth. I don't know, something like that.
Yum.
Right? Don't you smoke your cigars when you're gardening?
And it's not the thing that's kept me away from cigars, because they're kind of fun to play with, but it's like the morning after when you're in the shower and you're going, yeah.
Right, and it's rare to find a beer that stands up really well to a cigar. I feel like this one does. I honestly haven't tried that. I haven't tried that pairing, but that flavor of tobacco can overpower many beers.
And this is around 5%.
That one's actually 6.2.
Oh, I
think. Yeah, that molasses contributes an awful lot of fermentables.
Yeah, I could see that.
And it finished, and I don't know the finishing gravity offhand on this one, but it finishes quite dry. I want to say it's very similar to the lager.
Wow, I would buy a crowler of this for sure.
And I mentioned at the top of the talk here, our anniversary party.
Oh.
I took a barrel of this into my little pilot system, and then I added a 50-pound bag of DME and fermented it the same. And then I stuck it in a Kentucky bourbon barrel for 6 months, and that's what's going to be our special bottle release, anniversary release. It's pushing 13% alcohol at that point, and it's the double Davenporter.
Wow. That sounds tasty.
Yeah, and those tobacco notes just get amplified, especially hanging out in a bourbon barrel.
Wow. Well, Adam, this has been a lot of fun. I'm sorry it's been so long since we've gotten together, but we'll make up for it with another show very soon.
And I think there's going to be we might have to have a sequel to this at some point, because I'm looking at all these old records, and I'm finding some styles and beers that are piquing my curiosity.
Ooh.
Like, I don't know if we want to get into it now, since you're heading in the direction of wrapping up. But
you sense that.
I could talk at length about pre-Prohibition Weiss beer as well.
Ooh.
Which is interesting.
Count me in.
Yeah, we want to talk about it?
Well, not right now.
Well, yeah, fine. Maybe I'll brew it then, and we'll see. That's a big teaser for anyone out there, I guess. And I know a couple of my customers they listen to the show, so I'm kind of showing my hand there a little bit, I guess, for those two regulars. But I'm trying to come up with a pre-Prohibition Weiss beer that's worth drinking.
Spoilers.
Yep.
All right, Adam. Thank you, sir. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, thanks again to Adam. We're planning to get together again in a few days to record round 2. That'll take us through the rest of that 6-pack. And there's some fun-sounding stuff in there, so I'm greatly looking forward to that. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.